You are listening to Our Urban Voices with Dr. Alphonse Javed, a podcast that presents Christian narratives through diverse voices that impact urban ministry. Here is your host.
In this podcast, we cover everything from churches and church planting efforts, mission and missions organization evangelism, and unreached people groups, emerging movements and initiatives, justice, current events related to faith, and the persecuted church too, author interviews, and more. Let's get to it. Hello, and welcome back to a special edition of Our Urban Voices. As an extension of the Heart for Muslims conference, all of this month's episodes explore the 2022 conference theme, the power of proximity, how your location, culture, and shared experience can bring Christ to Muslims. I'm your host, Dr. Alphonse Javed. Today, I'm joined by Laura. She serves as a mobilizer for Latin America, sharing about God's heart for Asia and the Middle East with local churches. Laura's hope is to see more Latino engaging Middle Easterners. For security reasons, she goes by the name Laura. So our topic today focus on near culture missions, Latinos bringing the gospel to Middle Easterns. Before we jump in, a little about our friend and our guest, Laura. She is originally from South America and attended seminary in New York City. She has been engaging people from other cultures for over 5 years. She has engaged with the women through social media, and while she lived in New York City, she served in a local ESL program where she engaged Muslim women. Thanks for joining us today, Laura.
Thank you for having me, brother. I'm doing well. Yeah, glad to be here.
All right. So before we start our conversation, I would love our audience to hear about you. It would be awesome if you can share a little bit about your family with us.
Sure. So as you mentioned, I'm a Latina. And so, yes, family is very important for us. I'm one of 4 children. 2 of my siblings are married, the oldest and the youngest. I have a nephew. I'm currently living in South America. And I think something that we have in common with my siblings and my parents is our heart to serve others.
Yeah.
And something that it's really interesting that I think doesn't happen much in the States is that I live with my parents, even though I'm a grown-up, but I still live with my parents, and because why not, right? It's like,
yeah, right.
I will say this is actually very common in the Latino families. You stay with your parents until you get married.
So,
and not only Latinos.
Yeah, and that's exactly how Muslim culture is. Eastern culture is very much similar to Latino culture, where what you just said, you live in the same household, you stay in that same family building, and your children are born there and their children are born there. So I completely agree. It's awesome.
Yeah.
My whole family is same. The ladies, when they got married, my sisters, they moved out. Of course, I mean, they went to be they left to be with their husbands, wherever their houses were. And my brothers, they are still with my parents, and their wives are there and their children are there. So that's pretty cultural thing. To start, please let me move us back to our conversation about Heart for Muslims and Muslim culture and Middle East and all that. One of the things that you mentioned previously, how you were surprised by the way you felt at home in the Middle East. What are some examples of the cultural similarities that you noticed as a Latino in the Middle East? One being this, just what I just said, we are talking about families and we are comparing actually similarities as we were talking about. So go ahead, start there, and then I'll ask you about your spiritual journey in a minute. Go ahead.
Okay. So when I got to the Middle East, I was really surprised. I was like looking around. I was like, I'm on the other side of the world, and I do feel familiar. Like even the way that structure of the place where I was, it was just very interesting for me. So I went on and I started asking other Latinos that were there. And I was like, okay, let's talk about these similarities, because there are similarities. So I can mention 5. And I will say the first one is hospitality, or that warm culture that we call. And it's that people are very welcoming, like us. And like if you get to someone's home, they will offer you food, they will offer you the best that they have, right? And that's something that happens here. I remember growing up, having lots of people coming over, and you will be just like offering, uh, everything that you have at home. So that's one of the things, the hospitality or warm culture. And the second one is the family. As we were just talking, family plays a very important role in society, for us, for them. And family events, like all the things that you have in common, like people get together with extended family, uncles, aunts, like everyone in the in the family will come, like the cousin that you have never seen, but you will meet at some point. So I feel like that's very, very, like that's a thing that we have in common too. The other thing that I will say is the role of men in both cultures.
Right.
And which is like machismo, as we call it here. So that was also something that I found, that it was very, very similar. And even the religiosity too, because even though we're not, Muslims, but there are a lot of the Catholic system and the traditions and all of that are things that we can relate in terms of the commitment to their religion and all of that.
Right. Yeah. And both religion are work-based religion anyways. So there is also that idea of work-based faith too.
Yeah.
So let me take you back now. Share a little bit about your spiritual journey, how you got involved in ministry to Middle Eastern. So let me take you back, and then we'll move forward again.
Okay. So I grew up in a family that loves God and loves serving the community of believers and others. So a big part of my life growing up was in what we call the church context. So I remember helping my grandmother cleaning the church, and she will do it with so much love, because she will say, "This is for the Lord." So I was very involved in that context from a very young age. And when I was 8 years old, I think that's the time where I had an encounter with God, and when I decided to consciously give my life to Him. So I decided to follow Him, and I feel like that's something that I've been doing multiple times through my whole life, just that recommitting myself to Him. And in terms of how I got involved in this ministry to Middle Easterners, I will say it happened gradually. It started when I attended a missions conference like 9 years ago or 10 years ago, where I was able to grasp God's heart for the nations. And I started praying for the nations, and my prayers started to be, "Here I am, Lord, send me whatever you want," even though it seems impossible, like how someone from, a family here in this country can get to the other side of the world.
Right.
But he answered, and he started putting, the Middle East in my heart. And so I started being more intentional, praying for them specifically. And 7 years after that, I was able to go to the Middle East in a short-term missions trip that I had with an organization. And that trip was just flamed that passion in my heart, the passion that the Lord had placed. So I started thinking on, I need to learn more about, these cultures and their religion, so that I can connect with them, knowing more what I'm doing, and what God is doing overall. So that's where I moved to New York City. My first encounter with Muslims was in the Middle East. Before that, I've never seen one. I've just heard about them, But when I moved to the Middle East, when I moved, to New York City, just to learn more about intercultural studies. And wow, I believe this is one of the, the best places in the world to learn more about this, right?
Yeah.
So while I was studying there, I started praying and looking for opportunities to connect with women from the Middle East. So I met some of what now are my Muslim friends, and I met them through other friends and through a local ESL program where I was helping for some time. So that's how I got involved.
That's really cool. And both places now, let me try to put this together. So in Middle Eastern cultural context, you saw those similarities, right? As a Latina. And then here in New York, when you were working and going to school and doing all different things you have done here, you also learn new things. I'm sure you learn new things. So based on some of the reactions that you have gotten from Middle Easterns, whether there or here, what similarity do you think they have noticed as well?
I will say the people oriented kind of like the proximity with them, and like just having the time. Like if I visited them, I didn't have an agenda really, because it's like if I'm time oriented, I lost, because they just want to drink tea, they want to eat sweets, they want to dance, they want to do all these things that I think they realized, or they recognized, they saw that I was like open and flexible and like, just go with the flow, So I would say that's one of the things that come to mind in this moment.
Yeah. This is, you're right. Even well, I've been here way too long to have those things in my mind anymore. But this is something surprises me when when you're sitting with the Middle Easterns, they just lose the concept of time. And there's a joke, often the joke is like, South Asians or Middle Easterns are always late to things. But same thing goes with that too. Is they don't have that kind of, they're not constrained to time when the relationship is taking place. In relationship, you just consumed by relationship, and therefore even the services, when I travel and I'm a pastor, so when I travel and speak or preach, their services are very different. They are longer, and the more, even like when the service is over, still there's fellowship element going on. They can spend more time. So I totally see your point. So they see the similarities. If we I can see the similarities between Latino culture and Middle Eastern culture in that respect too. Did you know Arabic or any of the Middle Eastern languages before you begin this ministry? Have you found this to be a benefit or obstacle in ministry?
Well, so I did not know Arabic, and I still don't know Arabic, just a little bit. Shwaya shwaya, as they say. Do I think it depends on where you are reaching out to them. So when I went to the Middle East and I didn't know Arabic at all, it was frustrating for me not to be able to communicate. But at the same time, I was really grateful to be able to speak English, because of course, English is not my first language, right? So having English for me was like, wow, this is the way to communicate. Of course, Spanish, it's nothing here. No one speaks Spanish. So I was grateful for that. And I think that was the tool that God used. And I didn't take it for granted, because it was really a blessing to be able to communicate in some ways. So I was able to communicate in English with some people. And then through English with most of the people, with a translator, So that was a blessing for me. So English has become that first primary way to communicate with Middle Easterners, in my experience.
Yeah, and again, if you know the culture and you understand, not only know the culture in sense that you learned it, rather you come from the same culture, it's much easier to deal with people who are not of the same language. So, for example, my first time I came out of Pakistan was I went to Greece. Now, Greece, even though it's a European country, but in many ways they are Eastern, because like between East and West. So it was a beautiful, perfect place for me. It was not too Western or too Eastern. It just gave me, it was just perfect. But from there, my journey continued. I went to Afghanistan, Iran, and in those countries, the culture did not change. Only change was the language. So my early days were the same way. I have experienced the same thing in Afghanistan and Iran, even though I didn't know the language, but the culture was same. It allowed me to build relationship and even prosper in those relationship and in the mission work. So I completely understand that. So now let's switch gears a bit, and what I want to do is go back to talking about your role as a mobilizer. What types of engagements or ministry opportunities do you talk to churches about?
Okay, so in our Latina context, I think there has been a shift that has been going on for over 30 years, right? Which is going from being a missions field to becoming a missions force. And that kind of conversation has been going on, but not all the community here it's aware of that. So there are still many that are waiting for people to come and reach those that are next to us. And so in that sense, there, like I will say, my role is in the opportunities that I have to engage with local churches is to share about God's heart and love for the nations, to share about the need, the reality that people are living, and to go from that proximity and the opportunities that we have to connect with them, even though they seem to be so far in some ways, you know? So I think that's how I engage with the local churches and in national events or the places where I'm able to talk. I start with looking at God's mission because it starts in his heart, right? And when we get to grasp that and we get to see the reality now and the opportunities that I share with them is starting where we are and looking at the migration. There are many Muslims here in our countries, even though they're not like big communities like in New York, you know, but there are opportunities and we need to start seeing them. But also using our occupation or our profession, you know, it's like, how can I, even for youth, especially for youth, is how can I go out and, you know, work, use the tools that I have in my hand in a different context, in a different country, and how that can be the platform to share God's love with other people. How can I engage with other people in different contexts through, you know, being a student or finding a job, all those things that are out there, because God, it's working. And he's like, you know, we need more workers for his harvest. So that's kind of how I start engaging and the focus that I give.
Good. So what kind of response do you receive in Latin American churches when you talk about ministry to Middle Easterns?
I think there are many preconceptions of Middle Easterners. So to get to show them as they are, they're people just like us whom God loves. That moment for the people that are listening, it's just like, oh, you know, it's like, wow, this is awesome. It's true. Like, why I didn't see this before. And that passion and that like interest is just amazing. So it has been like God is awakening in Latin America. And so it's good to start seeing those kind of responses. Of course, there are many that have a lot of questions. There are people that are like, but it is safe. Is it safe? You know, all the things that social media had placed in there that we need to go against and like really show them that they're just people like us and that God loves them. So I feel like there is interest and people are willing to learn more. So when we have trainings or when we have like workshops on all of these things, more and more people are getting involved because there is interest to see how God is working and how they can join him in what he's doing.
Before we close, what practical steps would you offer to other Latinos who are interested in outreach to Muslims but are not sure where to start? How would you encourage them?
I will say start praying.
Okay.
Start praying and be intentional. Just do it. You know, it's like learn more about Muslims in the area where you are. Like if you're a Latino in the US, man, there are so many opportunities. Or if you're wherever you are, it's like pray for that and find opportunities to connect with people. Walk to the deli, right? You know, in the corner and get to know the owner or get some halal food and ask their names. It start with the simple quote unquote things, but that will lead to a relationship. Right. And just share with them about your life. Be transparent, because I had said it. God is working, and there's so many ways that He's inviting us to join Him. So those are some practical steps.
And I think it's one of those, as you said, that pray, but take initiative. It's being intentional about those people whom God has put around you, or God has put you among. Either way, I think it's important to know that you gotta initiate that, right? One of the things I was thinking as you were talking is so much easier for Pakistani or Arab person or South Asian Muslim to engage with a Latin person than a white American Caucasian person. It's simply because the way they see them politically and what they have always known, and right away they see them as I'm talking about from the perspective of Muslim community, they see them as threat. But when they see a Latino individual, Latin person, is the threat is already gone. They lower their guards down. That gives, I think, that gives guards people opportunity to share the gospel, and I think that's something we should never undermine. That if there's a cultural aspect exists, if all these things exist, all we need to do is just step in. Yeah. So finally, Laura, how can people listening to this podcast pray for you and your ministry and the Middle Easterns who still need to hear about Jesus?
Well, thank you for asking this. I think just continue to pray for that awakening in the Latin American church, to be open to God's heart and to step into what He is calling us to during this time, but also to do it in partnership with those that have gone and have done all this for so many years, that we can have that openness to learn from you guys, from the North as we talk, and that we can grow together so that more will hear about His love.
Is there anything else that you would like to add?
No, I think there's so many opportunities. I think God is working, and it is time for us to step in. So just let's do it.
Amen. That's good. That's a good charge. So thank you so much for being on the show. Again, that was Laura. She serves as a mobilizer among Latin American churches to help them engage Middle Easterns. This episode has been part of this month's series on the power of proximity. And thank you to all our listeners. If you appreciate this podcast, please be sure to subscribe to the show and leave an honest review wherever you listen to your podcasts. Tune in next week for more honest conversations from diverse voices.
You've been listening to Our Urban Voices with Dr. Alphonse Javed, which presents Christian narratives through diverse voices that impact urban ministry. Please check back for new episodes every week.